Joseph Locke was a preeminent Victorian railway engineer. His statue stands in Barnsley Lock Park, where this photograph was taken. It's great to be able to give this Brahma lecture about Joseph Locke, his life and the impact he had, his legacy. I'm Peter Roberts, and I presented the Brahma lecture on Monday the 17th of March 2025 in the Council Chamber of Barnsley Town Hall. I'm pleased that this recording will be available for more people to see and to hear. In my talk, you will hear about who was Joseph Locke, what did he do in his life, what were his achievements, where can we see his impact on the world today, and you'll probably find out that I like old maps. Joseph Locke, Robert Stevenson, and Isambard Kingdom Brunel. These were the giants of Victorian railway engineering. Together, they drove forward the construction and development of the railway, paving the way for the modern mainline railway system. I like what the Provost of Greenock said in 1841. The name of Locke will be associated with the triumphs of the locomotive and the marvels of the steam revolution for all coming time. This is what this lecture is about. Joseph Locke was born on August the 9th, 1805, at Attercliffe in Sheffield, the fourth and youngest son of William Locke, the colliery manager. Joseph Locke moved to Barnsley in 1810, aged 5. My story, shown in these maps, was about how Joseph Locke came with his family by cart or carriage, horse-drawn, from Sheffield to the township of Barnsley. A good story, but in fact William Locke left his job in Attercliffe in 1807 to manage a colliery in Huddersfield for 3 years. So the Lockes travelled south to Barnsley from Huddersfield. This map shows Barnsley much as they would have found it, quite a small township. They lived near the centre of Barnsley, up Coalpit Lane, otherwise known as Pinfold Hill, near his father's colliery, Porters, shown here on the map by the blue arrow. This was just up from Westgate, which we now know as Shambles Street. This sketch of Barnsley shows what it looked like at about that time. The sketch on the right shows Pinfold Hill, where the Lockes lived. The chapel at the top, now the Lamp Room Theatre, was built in 1794, so Joseph Locke will have known it. Joseph Locke attended Barnsley Grammar School from 1810 to 1820. It was said he received a rudimentary education there. It's now the Cooper Gallery, which opened in 1914. It was a short walk each day from where he lived. Let's see his possible route. Here you can see where the Locke family lived and the way Joseph walked from Pinfold Hill to school on Kirkgate, now called Church Street. He probably walked down Church Lane, which we now call Westgate. During this period, Barnsley was beginning to change. John Whitworth, architect and town planner, was levelling the top of Shambles Street and laying out some of the first main roads in the town centre. He also culverted part of Stuff Dyke. So, an early introduction for Joseph Locke to civil engineering. There's a blue plaque in Shambles Street, but William Locke didn't move there till 1825, and Joseph Locke only visited this place. We know William Locke lived in Pinfold Hill in 1820 because Burland's Annals in Barnsley Archives reports that a gathering of insurrectionist weavers marched to William Locke's place there to demand firearms. They then progressed to a meeting, found no one there, and dispersed. William Locke, a man of principle, will not have given them firearms. In 1820, at the age of 14, Joseph Locke became an apprentice with William Stobbart, the colliery viewer at Peelaw in Tyneside. He stayed there about 2 years. A viewer is a colliery manager, the agent of the owner, sometimes for more than one colliery. Joseph Lock would have gained experience in colliery operations and development as an apprentice to such a prominent mining manager, engineer, and viewer. During Joseph Lock's time in Tyneside, Robert Stevenson had an apprenticeship with Nicholas Wood, colliery manager and viewer at Killingworth Colliery. Joseph Lock then returned to Barnsley as an apprentice for 12 months under his father as underviewer and clerk. This involved work at the mine William Lock managed, but also in other work in which William Lock was involved. This included his work as surveyor of the Duke of Norfolk's mines and minerals in the West Riding, another opportunity to gain experience for Joseph. Joseph Lock's life changed in 1823 when George Stevenson, with his son Robert, visited the Locks in Barnsley. George Stevenson and William Lock were friends from their time together working in a Northumberland colliery. Robert had probably met Joseph at the time they were both apprentices at collieries in Tyneside. Perhaps he met George Stevenson too. George Stevenson by now was a well-regarded engine wright. He had built his first locomotive in 1814, seen here in this first day cover, called My Lord or Blutcher. This meant in Tyneside, Big Beast. He built his second locomotive in 1815, simply called Number 2. Or perhaps this one was called Blucher after the German general who fought valiantly at Waterloo. The year before his visit, in 1822, was the opening of the Hetton Colliery Railway, engineered by George Stevenson. The 8-mile railway from the Pithead to the Staithes at Sunderland was of revolutionary design, a combination of steam locomotives, stationary engines, and inclines. This replaced horse-drawn wagons. Stationary or fixed engines pull the wagons along on cables or thick ropes. The Stevensons also established a locomotive works in 1823 on 4th Street, Newcastle upon Tyne. It was the first such locomotive factory in the world, and its first locomotives were for the Stockton and Darlington Railway, which the Stevensons were building at that time. George Stevenson offered an apprenticeship to Joseph Lock, but no pay. Joseph Lock would go to work for him at his Newcastle locomotive works and elsewhere for George Stevenson's other projects. How much this was out of the blue is perhaps questionable. Perhaps George Stevenson was scouting for talent, and the Stevensons may already have met Joseph. Now then, what did Joseph Lock do in Newcastle other than working for George Stevenson? Thomas Tate tutored Joseph Lock in Lock's leisure time during his apprenticeship. This slide tells what Thomas Tate said about him. Joseph proved to be a diligent and impressive pupil. Joseph Lock also attended Newcastle Mechanics Institute. This was founded in 1824 with George Stevenson as president, and Joseph Lock made a speech there, perhaps his first public speaking. Joseph Lock's experience as an apprentice colliery viewer served him well in his time with George Stevenson. He tackled some major projects. His project with the Blackfell Colliery included both surveying, designing and constructing the 6-mile railway, showing his emerging project managing skills. And these were the first surveys he did for major railway construction. And what about building locomotives? Joseph Lock worked at the locomotive factory. Both George Stevenson and Robert Stevenson were directors, together with Edward Peace and Thomas Richardson, who financed it. Robert Stevenson was the working manager, but disagreements with his father led to him going to South America in June 1824 for 3 years until November 1827. This led to Joseph Lock taking on more responsibility, and this is what Joseph Lock said about this time. The absence of Robert Stevenson cast more responsibility on me, but helped me all the more to acquire an early knowledge of the practical parts of my profession. Thus he acquired his mechanical knowledge and unbounded confidence in the power of the locomotive engine. Joseph Locke was also involved in the Stockton-Darlington Railway. It was the first public railway to use steam locomotives in 1825, 200 years ago. This is the cover of the programme of the events being organised in this year. And here is the image promoting the opening ceremony of the Stockton-Darlington 200 in Bishop Auckland in March 2025. The route had originally been surveyed by George Overton, who planned to use standing engines, inclined planes and horsepower. George Stephenson promoted the use of engines moving along the lines, locomotives he called them, and he resurveyed the route. You can see their maps and the improvements that George Stephenson made on this slide. The Stockton-Darlington Railway connected collieries near Shildon with Darlington and Stockton. Although not primarily a passenger carrying concern, it transported its directors and 21 wagon loads of people, as well as 12 goods wagons behind a single locomotive on its inaugural journey in September 1825. Here are images of the opening ceremony, and notice the horse leading the way and the locomotive used. The movement of coal to ships rapidly became a lucrative business, and the line was soon extended to a new port at Middlesbrough. The bold black lines show the original railway lines of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, from the collieries near Shildon to Stockton and then on to Middlesbrough. As a result, the price of coal fell substantially. While coal wagons were hauled by steam locomotives from the start, passengers were carried in coaches drawn by horses. Carriages hauled by steam locomotives were only introduced in 1833, 8 years later. The Stockton and Darlington Railway used a mixture of stationary engines, locomotives and horse traction for the regular traffic. George Stephenson had an important role for Joseph Locke. He set up a second company on the 31st of December 1824 to plan and build railway lines and try and have a dominant position. He appointed Joseph Locke to the post of clerk for this company on January 11th, 1825, at the salary of £80 a year. So after just 1 year of working for Joseph Stephenson, he had a salary. His role involved writing letters and reports and surveying, calculating bridge structures, and so on. He remained clerk to this company until September 1833. Most of the railways proposed by the company between 1825 and 1833 were surveyed by Joseph Locke. The next venture for George Stephenson was the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and Joseph Locke's involvement led him to move to Liverpool. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway became the first steam-powered intercity railway for passengers and goods in the world. Its efficient commercial transportation of passengers and freight made its name and brought success to its investors. So why were investors interested? Well, goods traffic was at an all-time high between the port of Liverpool and the cotton town of Manchester in the 1820s. Journeys between these two hubs of manufacturing and trade were expensive and slow. The only choices were by canal boat or horse-drawn cart. Land agent William James had the solution. He gathered together a committee of merchants, bankers, engineers and politicians, and from this group came the first directors of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and they appointed George Stephenson's company to survey the route. Surveyors set out to measure the railway's route using spirit levels, theodolites and compasses, and they walked or went by horseback. But many landowners opposed the railway cutting through their land. They hired thugs to attack the men and their equipment and stop surveys. The surveyors took to working by moonlight, sneaking onto the land at night with decoy teams to distract the thugs. Here is one of the maps produced at the time, showing the intended route based on the surveys. And this map from 1828 shows the railway route between Liverpool and Manchester. And this map is of Barnsley at the same time. So no railways, but canals. In fact, there were two railways, the wagonways. The Silkstone Wagonway was built in 1828 too. It relied, however, on horses and inclined planes. George Stephenson had to fight vested interests in the form of stagecoach owners and canal developers or operators, as well as opposition from landowners. He struggled hard when interviewed in Parliament, where some of the vested interests had seats in the Lords. They challenged his background, found fault in his surveys, dismissed his proposals, and insulted him to his face. Some sources suggest that Joseph Locke was asked to resurvey parts of the line and produced a report that corrected his predecessor's mistakes. This would have strained their relationship. Despite the many criticisms of Stephenson's work, when the bill for the new line was passed on the 6th of April 1826, Stephenson was appointed as chief engineer. He appointed Joseph Locke as his assistant in charge of the eastern section of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and Charles Vignoles as the other assistant in charge of the western section. He resigned 6 months later. Locke was made sole engineer on the ground, with other resident engineers working under him. So what was the story behind this? Well, Vignoles was blamed for errors in the construction of the Wapping Tunnel. He resigned in February 1827 and replaced by Joseph Locke, who corrected his mistakes. When Locke went away to survey another railway line, serious problems arose in the tunnel, and the directors asked for Locke back to examine the works and report back to them. Inevitably, Locke's report reflected badly on George Stephenson's management, and relations between them became further strained. But Stephenson swallowed his pride, continuing to employ Locke, realizing that he was too valuable to lose. This slide shows the enormity of what they needed to do. The scale of engineering far exceeded the previous work of road and canal construction. Joseph Locke masterminded the massive Olive Mount cutting and the unprecedented more than 2,000-yard tunnel from Edge Hill to Wapping Docks. Here you see the Olive Mount cutting on the left and the Edge Hill tunnel on the two images on the right. And here is a view looking towards Manchester from near Liverpool, showing the scale of cuttings. One of the major obstacles to be overcome was Chat Moss, a large bog that had to be crossed. Although Stephenson usually gets credit for this feat, it is believed that it was Locke who suggested how to build the track across the bog, floating it over tree trunks and shingle using wooden sleepers. There are, in fact, records of Locke telling a new resident engineer the tricks of how to walk across the bog without sinking into it. Whilst the Liverpool and Manchester railway line was being built, the directors had still to decide whether to use stationary engines or locomotives. The well-regarded engineers Walker and Raystrick, in a report, recommended fixed engines, but the Stephensons and Locke were convinced that locomotives were vastly superior, and Joseph Locke and Robert Stephenson undertook a lot of practical research in the north of the country. In March 1829, Robert Stephenson and Joseph Locke wrote a pamphlet. This demonstrated the superiority of locomotives when used on a busy railway with goods and passengers travelling in both directions. This led to the directors holding an open trial to test locomotives in a controlled, practical way. This competition was a trial by ordeal to select the best locomotive to use on their railway. As you can see, it was quite a festive occasion. It lasted 6 days in October 1829. The rigorous stipulations and conditions for the Rainhill trials were set out in the notices and adverts for the competition, seen here. Here are the 4 competitors that came to the Rainhill trials: Perseverance, Saint-Péray, Novelty, the Rocket. Let's look at each of them in turn. Unfortunately, Perseverance was badly damaged during its long journey from Edinburgh to Liverpool. Birstall spent the first 5 days of the trials repairing his locomotive, but it ran on the 6th day, but only at 5 or 6 miles an hour. So it failed to reach the required 10 miles per hour and was withdrawn from the trial. It was, however, granted a £25 consolation prize, which is equal to almost £3,000 today. Saint-Péray nearly completed the trials, though at first there was some doubt as to whether it would be allowed to compete, as it was 300 pounds overweight. However, it did eventually complete 8 trips before cracking a cylinder. Despite the failure, it was purchased by the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, where it ran for 2 years before being leased to the Bolton and Leigh Railway. Novelty was lighter and considerably faster than the other locomotives in the competition, possibly though without the hauling power. Set to look like a travelling tea trolley, it had much in common with a fire pump they had designed earlier. It reached an astonishing 28 miles per hour on the first day of competition. It later suffered damage to a boiler, which could not be fixed properly on site. It ran the next day and reached 15 miles per hour before the repaired pipe blew and it had to be withdrawn. Joseph Locke said that George Stephenson viewed it as the real competition to Rocket and a possible winner, but when the pipe burst, George Stephenson said, so it didn't have the guts. And before we get to the Rocket, the surprise contender, perhaps it should have been called Nostalgia. It was entered as a favour for Brandreth, local to the trials from Liverpool. It used 2 horses walking on a drive belt for power, and it was withdrawn after an accident caused the horse to stamp through the floor of the engine. Note the fuel provided in front of the horse. The Rocket was the only locomotive that completed the trials. It averaged 12 miles per hour and achieved a top speed of 30 miles per hour, hauling 13 tons. Rocket not only pulled, but also pushed the wagons back and forth. The Rocket was declared the winner of the £500 prize, which is equal to over £55,000 today. Robert Stephenson designed Rocket and Forth Street Locomotive Works built it, and the Stephensons were given the contract to produce locomotives for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. When the line was opened on September 15th in 1830, another anniversary to look forward to, it was planned for a procession of 8 trains to travel from Liverpool to Manchester and back. People waved and cheered as the 8 locomotives and their carriages went past. The Duke of Wellington, the Prime Minister, and Robert Peel were in the leading carriage pulled by the Northumberland. However, tragedy then struck. Part way to Manchester, the locomotive stopped to refuel, and passengers clambered down onto the tracks, only to see Rocket charging towards them. In the confusion and panic, William Huskisson, MP for Liverpool, fell with his leg beneath Rocket's wheels. He later died from his wounds. After this disaster, the Duke of Wellington favoured returning to Liverpool, but others feared this could lead to a riot in Manchester. The procession continued, but the passengers no longer waved at the bulging grandstands of cheering crowds. The railway directors feared Huskinson's death would frighten away passengers, but railway fever only grew. Here are some images of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway's early days. The owner of the canal was an earlier objector to the railway. Here is the viaduct over the Sankey Canal near Newton Willows, another canal owner who also objected to the railway. Built in 1830, it was the earliest ever railway viaduct. It's still used today and is known locally as the Nine Arches. And a little about Joseph Locke. He'd lived in Liverpool from when he began work on the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and he'd made friends with a much older man, the printer and poet John McCreary. John McCreary had a daughter, Phoebe, described as a pretty, intelligent and courageous girl, and Joseph and Phoebe married in 1834. Following the success of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, other towns and cities could see the benefits that would come from better links between the nation's centres of commerce, and they sought railway connections. Here are two comments. The earlier problems, due to lack of capital, no longer applied, and investors were easy to find. This enthusiasm spread even to a Sheffield newspaper. A fascinating leader from the Sheffield Independent in 1830. I'm sure the language used here wouldn't be repeated in today's newspapers. In fact, Birmingham businessmen were planning a link to London, and the group of financiers that were involved with the Liverpool and Manchester Railway could see that Birmingham would be an ideal goal for a railway from Liverpool and Manchester. This was the Grand Junction Railway, over 82 miles long and linking Birmingham with the Liverpool and Manchester line. It passed through Warrington, Crewe, Stafford and Wolverhampton before reaching Birmingham, and the line included 100 underbridges, 50 overbridges, 5 viaducts, 2 tunnels and 2 aqueducts. Here are 2 maps of the route. The one on the left dates from 1839. Drake's map shows the route from the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in the north to Birmingham, or as some prefer it, from Birmingham to the north. Enlarging the map a little, you can see the new Grand Junction line going down from the Liverpool and Manchester line to where 4 lines cross and join at Crewe. And now, from Crewe southwards, and from Wolverhampton to Birmingham. An impressive line and an impressive map. It also has a distance chart showing the miles from Birmingham, and importantly, from the point of view of having as flat and level a route as possible, a height profile or section seen at the bottom of the map. Drake's book of the Grand Junction Railway, from which this map is taken, has detailed information about the towns and cities on the route. It's a pity there isn't a Drake's book for the railway lines going through Barnsley and Sheffield with similar information that we could read today. Joseph Locke surveyed the route of the railway from Warrington in the north via Crewe Hall and Wolverhampton to Birmingham. He did it for George Stephenson's company, and he walked the entire route on several occasions. The bill for the Grand Junction Railway was passed in Parliament on May 6, 1833, on the same day as the bill for the London and Birmingham Railway. However, after 10 years with George Stephenson, Joseph Locke wished to start up on his own. He wanted the position of Chief Engineer of the Grand Junction. But George Stephenson was not happy with him going for such a post. However, the railway company had confidence in Locke, but it didn't want to offend the father of the railway system. So they came up with a compromise. The line will be divided in two, with Locke responsible for the northern section and Stephenson for the southern section. Joseph Locke created detailed specifications so that by September 1834, every contract on the northern section was settled. On the southern section, not one contract had been left, and George Stephenson resigned. By late 1835, Joseph Locke had become chief engineer, and he appointed John Errington as his assistant, the resident engineer. This all caused a rift with George Stephenson and Robert Stephenson, but up to this point, Locke had always been under George Stephenson's shadow. The Dutton Viaduct was the most challenging engineering feature on the line. It crossed the River Weaver and the Weaver Canal near Northwich. The contractor was William Mackenzie. Its cost was £55,000. It was the first project for which Thomas Brassey submitted a tender, but William Mackenzie's estimate was £5,000 lower. The Penkridge Viaduct was the first successful bid by Thomas Brassey for a railway contract. Brassey's original tender for George Stephenson was £26,000. Joseph Locke gave Brassey better information and agreed a price of £6,000. This was the start of Joseph Locke's long relationship with Brassey as a contractor. Considering that this was the first long-distance line in the world, its opening was a very quiet affair. A train pulling 3 coaches and a mail coach set off from Liverpool, and a similar one set off from Manchester. They met at Newton Junction, where both trains were combined and hauled southwards to Birmingham by the locomotive Wildfire. The travelling post office, where mail was sorted for the first time on a moving train, was instituted on the Grand Junction in January 1838, using a converted horse box. The venture was a great success. In the first 6 months of operation, it carried over 200,000 passengers, and it continued to prosper. The construction of the line in record time was a great triumph for Locke. The average cost was less than the estimated £20,000 per mile, which was very cheap when compared with the cost of the London-Birmingham Railway at £46,000 per mile. It was a triumph of sound project management, bringing it in on time, at cost, and exceeding expectations. When the London and Birmingham Railway opened in September 1838, sharing a station with the Grand Junction, it linked by train London, Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool. Joseph Locke and Robert Stephenson had together provided a true long-distance intercity railway route. The fact that a London to Manchester railway line was constructed in the north and from London at the same time is perhaps something we could learn from today. This was the turning point of Joseph Locke's life. It was the start of his planning and building railway lines across Britain and indeed Europe. On several occasions, he stepped in to take over from other engineers and save the day. And was Joseph Locke responsible for a well-known song? Oh, Mr. Porter, what shall I do? I want to go to Birmingham and they're taking me on to Crewe. Joseph Locke was the man who put his finger on the map and said, we will build it here. He was responsible for laying out the new town of Crewe, as well as the railway works, when the company moved the works from Liverpool, Edge Hill, in 1843. In 1840, Joseph Locke was commissioned to create Crewe and Crewe Works. Here are the minutes that refer to that. And he was then asked to provide a church and a school. These two maps show the impact of Joseph Locke on the landscape of the area with the building of Crewe. The map on the left, before the railways came, and on the right, with both railways and the township of Crewe. There was a mass migration from Liverpool to Crewe, and it appears that the town of Crewe was well received by the press and perhaps the people who moved. There's now a heritage centre in Crewe, and here is their celebration of the 180th anniversary of Crewe Works and of Crewe itself. The Crewe Works was the biggest of its kind in the world, with its own brickworks, steelworks and rolling mills. Here is a list of the main railways surveyed and constructed by Joseph Locke, together with a map showing their spread across England and Scotland. The next line after the Grand Junction was London-Southampton, in which Errington had a major role and Brassey was the contractor for the whole line. The line from Birmingham to Glasgow and then on to Aberdeen was surveyed and constructed by Joseph Locke, as well as the line from Manchester to Sheffield via the Woodhead Tunnel. And how to get to Carlisle and on to Scotland. In 1839, George Stephenson proposed a circuitous route that avoided the Lake District and its hills by going across Morecambe Bay and all the way round the coast. He claimed, "This is the only practicable line from Liverpool to Carlisle. The making of a railway across Shap Fell is out of the question." The directors rejected his route and chose the one proposed by Joseph Locke, one that used steep gradients and passed over Shap Fell. The line was completed by Locke and was a success. Joseph Locke completed the build of the railway line from Sheffield to Manchester, replacing Charles Vignoles. It included the 3-mile Woodhead Tunnel. George Stephenson, again, claimed that this was such a difficult undertaking that it could not be done, saying that he would eat the first locomotives that got through the tunnel. 157 tons of gunpowder were used and over 8 million tons of water were pumped out, a major undertaking. But the Manchester-Sheffield line opened on the 23rd of December 1845. However, construction had been arduous and dangerous, and it resulted in the deaths of 32 men and seriously injured 140 others. By the 1850s, Barnsley was experiencing the benefits of the railway, and in 1857, a new branch line from the now Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway brought Joseph back to the town of his formative years. Here you see the procession entering the station in Eldon Street. This had been opened in 1850. You can see the train coming over the bridge and also the church on the left in Regent Street. Joseph Locke was welcomed back with some enthusiasm by the crowd. The ceremonial opening and the accolades he received undoubtedly evoked fond memories. He became adopted by Barnsley as a special representative and in turn proved to be a prominent benefactor. Here you see a map of Barnsley at the time, with 2, some would say 3 railways, a station, and much expanded with new wide streets in the centre. Joseph Locke was also in demand for work in mainland Europe, building major routes in France, the Netherlands and Spain. He formed a partnership with John Errington in 1843, having worked with him since the time of the Grand Junction. The image here shows the opening of the Paris-Le Havre line. And it was then blessed. Part of the Rouen-Le Havre line involved the building of a viaduct over the town of Baratin. In the 1950s, the mayor of Baratin asked whether they could have a copy in marble of the statue of Joseph Locke found in Barnsley, and here it is with its inscription. But there was a problem back in the 1840s with the viaduct's construction. Shortly after it was completed, after several days of heavy rain, the viaduct collapsed. The cause of the collapse was never determined. One theory blamed the lime mortar, which had been obtained from local sources as part of the contract. Whatever the cause, Brassey rebuilt the viaduct at his own expense, this time using lime of his own choice. The viaduct reopened in 1847 and still stands and is in use today. And here are some more recent images taken by the nephew of Roddy Lane, the great-grandson of Joseph Locke, and present at the Bramah lecture. In 1847, Joseph Locke bought the manor of Honiton and became the MP there. He also was granted a coat of arms. The original grant documentation was purchased by the Friends of the Archives and is held now in Barnsley Archives. Here is part of Locke's coat of arms, showing the falcon with wings outstretched and an open padlock unlocked. This was incorporated in Barnsley's first coat of arms in 1869, when it became a borough and had a town council. And it is still there today in the current crest for Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council. Here are some key dates in Joseph Locke's life, going back to his marriage. He became a leader in his profession. And Phoebe and Joseph Locke adopted a baby, Minna Locke. She had 7 children, one of whom was Roddy Lane's great-grandfather. At the height of his power and the undisputed leader of his profession, Joseph Locke died suddenly whilst on holiday in Moffat in September 1860. He was brought back to London, accompanied by his nephew William Locke. As a leading instigator of the National Railways network, Joseph Locke's colleagues and peers wished that he should be buried with Thomas Telford and Robert Stephenson in Westminster Abbey. Locke's wife Phoebe refused on the ground that she could not be buried with him, so he was buried in Kensal Green Cemetery. Brunel is also buried there. It's quite fitting that the cemetery is bounded by Brunel's Great Western Railway and Stephenson's London to Birmingham Railway, which Locke extended to Scotland. Phoebe Locke did, however, agree to a memorial window in Westminster Abbey. However, during the First World War, the Locke Memorial window was removed from the Abbey for safety, and it was not returned. It was eventually handed over to Barnsley Council, and the window is now stored by the council, awaiting restoration. Robert Stephenson, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and Joseph Locke were the giants of the construction of the railway system. Joseph Locke should really be recognised for having made a contribution as great as that of the other two. The Institute of Civil Engineers commissioned Baron Marachetti to create 3 sculptures of Locke, Stephenson and Brunel. Permission was requested for placing the statues in St Margaret's Gardens, outside the Houses of Parliament in Westminster. The permission was not guaranteed by the government. The statue of Brunel is now by the embankment at Temple Bar, looking towards his now lost Hungerford Bridge, and of Robert Stephenson outside Euston Station. the start of the London to Birmingham Railway. Joseph Lock's is in Barnsley's Lock Park. And here you're seeing an assembly of Victorian engineers. Brunel with the cap, Robert Stevenson seated, and Joseph Lock standing at the back on the left with a scroll, perhaps a survey map or another signed contract. The painting in the background shows Stevenson's Britannia tubular bridge across the Menai Straits to Anglesey. Joseph Lock may be said to have completed the triumvirate of the engineering world. Why then does Joseph Lock seem to be in Brunel and Stevenson's shadow? The distinctive features of Lock's railway works were economy and sound project management. Lock was an engineer who avoided dazzling and costly displays of virtuosity. Joseph Lock's greatest achievement was to set the civil engineering profession new standards of accuracy, order, and discipline. The distinctive feature of Lock's railway works were economy, which involved the absence of tunnels. An illustration of this is that there are no tunnels between Birmingham and Glasgow. When, however, major engineering works were necessary, they were faced fairly and squarely and costed in the plans. Joseph Lock had confidence in the ever-increasing improvement of steam locomotives, and as a result was not afraid of gradients. This is how he avoided the need for tunnels. In turn, this meant that the engineering costs were kept to a minimum, and the cost of Joseph Lock's lines were often half that of his peers. Here are some examples. So what memorials are there for Joseph Lock? It's perhaps a surprise to learn that following his death, the first memorial to Joseph Lock was one in front of the new Roman Catholic schools in Dodworth Road. Joseph Lock and his wife Phoebe had been the main benefactors for the building of the schools, and the Locks laid the foundation stone for the new buildings in 1858. The new schools opened in 1859. The stones of the school were reused, and the memorial was moved to Holyrood church grounds until it was struck by lightning and destroyed in the 1960s. Blue plaques provide a memorial too. Here are 3 blue plaques in Barnsley. And some elsewhere. And now to Lock Park. Joseph Lock's widow, Phoebe, gave Lock Park to the people of Barnsley in memory of her husband and as part of her husband's final wishes. She also gave £2,000 to the Barnsley Grammar School to fund pupils there, the Lock Scholars. Back to Lock Park. It's a great example of a Victorian park and is Grade 2 listed. Phoebe Lock gave High-Style Field for the public park. High-Style Field is a field including the quarry on this map. Earlier, it had been used for horse racing, hence the name Racecommon Road leading up to the park from Barnsley. Another story. The original park, then called People's Park in High-Style Field, was opened in 1862. The early park amounted to 17 acres of land, about 7 hectares. It was organised by Joseph Lock's former partner, John Edward Errington, and its layout was set out by Mr. Edwards of the Office of Lock and Errington in London. Here we have the gates of the 1862 entrance to Lock Park, with the Barnsley Borough Council coat of arms, including Joseph Lock's falcon and open padlock emblem. From the gates, you can look back at Barnsley Town Hall, built in 1933, so 70 years after Lock Park was opened. The North Lodge at the entrance to Lock Park was built in sandstone. local sandstone, by John Moxon, stonemason and architect of Barnsley. The gateway and walls along Park Road were built by Mr. Tattersall of Silkstone, so some local contractors. A major feature of the park from this time is a serpentine walk from the North Lodge entrance through the valley left from the former quarry. A set of stone steps led and leads up to a statue of Joseph Locke. This listed bronze statue by Baron Marchetti was unveiled by Lord Alfred Paget in January 1866, with bands playing, speeches made, and poems read. It was funded by the Institute of Civil Engineers and unveiled to a spectacular gun salute by the 4th Battalion of the West Riding Volunteers. Following Phoebe Locke's death in 1866, her sister, Sarah McCreary, extended Locke Park, more than doubling the park's size. She commissioned a prominent architect to design the overall park, leading up to a tower. The overall costs were about £11,000. Spiers was a leading architect, trained in Paris, and curator and then Master of Architecture at the Royal Academy Schools. This is Spiers' design for the park, a layout of winding paths linking the main areas of the park and culminating in a terrace below the proposed tower at the park's highest point. Prominent Victorian landscape gardeners provided the planting. William Barron and Sons were well known for adventurous planting with both deciduous and evergreen trees and shrubs. Their adventurous planting was used to great effect in the avenues of broadleaf and conifer trees and the individually distinctive planted roundels at the junctions of the main paths. The walls around the extended park were built at this time, together with South Lodge. South Lodge, a very different design, was built in 1877 in red brick, in the arts and crafts style. It's close to the pedestrian exit from the park to Racecommon Lane. Behind South Lodge, just outside the park, is a listed building. Built in 1873, it was one of the first of shuttered concrete. And near to South Lodge is a stone marking the old borough boundary between Barnsley and Worsbrough. So part of Barnsley's park was in Worsbrough. And now Locke Park Tower. Locke Park Tower was built in 1877. It was in memory of the widow of Joseph Locke Phoebe, who gifted the first part of Locke Park. It was commissioned by Sarah McCreary, Phoebe Locke's sister, who also donated the rest of the park. Here are the words of the dedication plaque at the back of the tower. Locke Park Tower was opened in 1877. It has impressive architecture and views. Here is a list of the main features. The work of building the tower was a mammoth exercise. Historic England have listed Locke Park Tower Grade 2 star due to its heritage significance and architectural features. The main aspects that they highlight are the design of Locke Park Tower as both an observation tower and a memorial, as a rare example of a structure in a 19th century public park dedicated to a woman and also commissioned by a woman. The importance of its architect, Richard Fenner Spiers, in the 19th century as master of the Royal Academy School of Architecture, and the tower being an integral part of the design of the overall layout of Locke Park, also designed by Richard Fenner Spiers. And here are some early photographs of the tower. It was a lot higher in those days than the trees. There was more ornamental planting, annually renewed. Another picture. Have you spotted what's now missing from the tower? The tower, approximately 70 foot high, had a weather vane on the top with Sarah McCreery's initials. It was saved when it blew down a few years ago. Here are some views from the top of the tower, this one looking towards Whisper Reservoir. A modern view showing St Edward's Church and part of Barnsley Town. And a similar view from earlier times. The ornamental fountain in the former quarry, today filled with plants, was presented to Miss McCreery in 1877 by the working men of Barnsley as a testimonial for her kindness in extending the park. And here are the plaques at the base of the fountain which describe this story. The fountain was also designed by Finis Spears. Here is his watercolour design from the Royal Academy. It's now part of Google Arts and Culture, curated by the Royal Institute of British Architects. The fountain was placed in the valley opposite Locke's statue to provide an additional focal point and also meeting place. The Serpentine Walk in the quarry was reworked for the opening of the extended park. The banners for the opening are visible near the park's entrance at North Lodge. Bands played, speeches were made, and poems were read. Again. The opening of the park was a grand affair. At the same time, FWT Vernon Wentworth of Wentworth Castle made a further donation of 1.5 acres of land. And going on down the valley, at the end of the valley, at the quarry face, the ABC steps with A to Z carved in each step. It leads up to 4 classical Ionic columns. The 4 columns were added in 1879. 4 columns were removed from the Commerce Building, which was a former post office in Barnsley at the corner of Church Street and Royal Street, prior to its demolition and replacement. This was just 2 years after the opening of the extended park. Here are some earlier pictures of the columns. St Edward's Church was opened in 1902. And have you spotted the emu? At the foot of the ABC steps is a large boulder made of Shap granite. It was found in Royston, taken there by glacial ice in the Great Ice Age 400,000 years ago. In the 1890s, FWT Vernon Wentworth gave this erratic boulder into the care of Barnsley Naturalist and Scientific Society, and it was placed in Lock Park. A local historian has said that it was possibly brought back by Joseph Locke from Shap when he built the railway there. So he was 400,000 years out. And here are the lions in the park, a favourite for taking children's photographs. Now the bandstand, refurbished in 2024. The bandstand is listed Grade 2, and it was opened in June 1908. It was made by the Lion Foundry Company near Glasgow. Rather different in those early days. And to conclude the history of Lock Park, in December 1914, about 7 acres of land off Carisbrooke Hall Road were purchased from the estate of Samuel Joshua Cooper. This completed the outline of the present park, taking it to 47 acres, 19 hectares. The boundary with the older park is still marked by a line of trees. This new area now includes the car park, games area and events field. Some other memories of Lock Park now lost. Unless you go to Pothouse Hamlet in Silkstone, where the grandest greenhouse has been taken. Lock Park has been the place for popular events over the years, with band concerts, miners' galas, and still continuing today. Funds raised by Friends of Lock Park and Barnsley Council enabled Friends of Lock Park to open Lock Park Tower in 2013, following repairs to make it safe. It was last opened in the 1980s. Friends of Lock Park have now opened Lock Park Tower to visit on the first Sunday afternoon of each month of October 2013. Hopefully this will continue. And may I pay tribute to the Friends of Lock Park volunteers. Returning to Joseph Lock with part of his coat of arms, the open, unlocked padlock, and the falcon with wings stretched for flight. This is on Lock Park's North Lodge. Truly a life unlocked by his own endeavours, and the future unlocked by his pioneering work, and his impact still seen today. Thank you.
I do claim to be his great-great-grandson, but here's a little problem. His daughter was adopted. So you've got to toss the coin, but being Victorian families at that time, they rather took care of their difficulties within families. So maybe there was some bloodline from either Joseph or Phoebe at the time. All I can tell you is my elder brother went on to be an engineer, so maybe that's the way. So there was, in my grandfather's house, there was a picture of Joseph as a black and white print that you saw on the screen earlier on. And that was always at the top of the stairs, but there was no discussion about him in the family ever. Nobody said, oh, well, Joseph did this, Joseph did that. No, it was only when I started living up near Chester and realised that the line I'm using to go up and down to London was actually Joseph's Lock's line and Crewe, where the four lines met going off to Anglesey and Manchester and up north and down south, that I started really taking some interest in him and more recently even researching. But the bit that's driven me on in recent times is that if I have a bit of time in London before I catch a train from Charing Cross Station, 5 minutes walk up the road is the National Portrait Gallery. So pop in there and see what you're. They have a static exhibition and they have separate exhibitions that are there for a short time. But in going round, there is George, there is Robert, and there is Brunel. Where is Joseph? Not there. Anyway, they closed it all down and did a complete refurb for 3 years. When it reopened, I thought I'd go along and see whether they found Joseph here. No chance. The same 3 glasses still on the wall, mine was Joseph. So I then thought, well, this won't do. So I started making a few inquiries, sending emails up and down. Oh yes, we know all about Joseph. We'd love to have a picture on the wall, but we haven't got anything that's suitable. One of the things you saw on the screen was actually an engraving of Joseph sitting down with his elbow on a table. They own that. I don't know what size it is, but the other ones of the other 3 people are all quite small portraits, so maybe that's considered too large. So I thought, well, there must be, the man was famous, he moved all over the country, he was an MP, etc. There must be a painting of him somewhere. So that's where I then got in touch with the National Portrait Gallery, so what about it? They said no. So where do I go next? I went down to Hunterston. Got hold of the museum there, all no anything else. They do have a blue plaque on the wall, but we've got nothing on it. Maybe it moved over to the county museum in Exeter. No chance. Then tried the National Railway Museum in York. Oh no, so we haven't got one of those, but we would like one. And so the thing goes on, and this very morning I got a reply after a couple of weeks from Crewe Museum. No, we haven't got one either. Yes, we'd like one. I'm still looking. But when I turned out my father's house after he died, amongst his collection of things was Joseph Lock's dress medals for going to the Posh dinner. And I thought, well, what on earth to do with these? The two important ones were two different grades of Legion d'Honneur for the work that he did in France. And I've been to the Barentine. It's a very spectacular thing. You stand underneath it and think this is wonderful. And there is his statue, standing in the evening sunlight. It looks magnificent. How did he build something like that? How did any of those engineers at that time build anything like that? There was no way of doing stresses and strains and new building materials and special steels had to come and all that thing. But I've got a feeling that a certain amount of Yorkshire canning came in. And at the end of the day, well, that'll do. I think that's basically how a lot of these engineers got going. Right, the medals, go back to the medals. I ended up giving them with my younger brother. We gave them to the Institution of Civil Engineers in London, rang them up. And they said, oh, if you come to, we've got the three railway, George and Robert and Joseph, in our main hall. So I went to a nice big hall, and there in the middle is a painting of Joseph. It must be about 8 foot tall, and the two Stevensons are only about 6 foot. Well done, Mark. Anyway, then I handed over these medals, and I said, I'm having a lot of difficulty to find out anything about him. And they said, well, not surprised, because he's generally known throughout the business as the forgotten engineer. Well, I would like to be on a bit of a crusade. If you want to join me, do. Try and find another painting of him so that goes on the wall, and secondly, to get his name, where's Michael Portillo when you need him, or Keith Waterman? Where are they when you need them to bring forward the people that actually built the railways that they love so much? One final thing, in 2 or 3 weeks' time is the Oxford and Cambridge annual boat race. And right towards the end of that boat race, what do they go under? They go under Barnes Railway Bridge. Who built Barnes Railway Bridge? Thank you very much.